The sky over Chicago was unusually dark that morning, the kind of gray that made people glance up and wonder if a storm was coming. But it wasn't clouds that dimmed the sunlight. It was something far stranger. Hovering above the city skyline were massive ships, their metallic surfaces gleaming faintly despite the gloom. They looked like nothing anyone had ever seen before, sleek and otherworldly, with glowing patterns etched into their hulls that pulsed softly, almost like they were alive. People stopped in the streets, craning their necks to get a better look. Some pointed excitedly while others stood frozen, unsure whether to feel awe or fear. The news spread quickly, first through whispers and phone calls, then across social media platforms until the entire world seemed to be holding its breath. These weren't just ordinary aircraft. Everyone knew that much. These were alien ships. Daniel. Carter adjusted his camera strap as he pushed through the growing crowd near Millennium Park. As a journalist for the small-town newspaper, the Prairie Times, he didn't usually cover events this big. But when the editor sent out an urgent email asking for volunteers to report on the alien situation, Daniel jumped at the chance. It wasn't every day you got to witness history, or whatever this was. He spotted a group of reporters gathered near one of the park's fountains, microphones in hand, shouting questions at anyone who might have answers. A man in a suit stood nearby, trying to calm the chaos. Daniel recognized him immediately. It was Mayor Lewis, flanked by two nervous-looking aides. The mayor's face was pale, but he managed a weak smile as he addressed the mob of journalists. "We are in communication with the visitors," he announced, his voice trembling slightly. "They have assured us that their intentions are peaceful. We ask everyone to remain calm and avoid panic." Peaceful? Daniel thought skeptically. That remained to be seen. He snapped a few photos of the mayor and the hovering ships, then turned his attention back to the crowd. People were murmuring among themselves, speculating about what the aliens wanted. Some believed they were here to share advanced technology or cure diseases. Others whispered darker theories that the aliens were invaders here to take over the planet. Nearby, a young woman held her child tightly, tears streaming down her face. "What if they hurt us?" she asked no one in particular. Her voice cracked with emotion, and Daniel felt a pang of sympathy. He couldn't blame her for being scared. After all, humanity had spent decades imagining this moment, usually in the form of disaster movies where aliens arrived with guns blazing. Now that it was actually happening, no one knew what to expect. As Daniel wandered deeper into the park, he noticed a man standing alone, staring up at the ships with a mixture of fascination and dread. The man wore a worn leather jacket and carried a sketchpad under one arm. His name was Ethan Moore, though Daniel didn't know that yet. When Daniel approached him, Ethan glanced over briefly before returning his gaze to the sky. "You believe them?" Ethan asked without preamble, his tone clipped. "About being peaceful, I mean." Daniel hesitated. "I don't know. Do you?" Ethan shook his head. "Nope. I've seen enough sci-fi movies to know how this usually ends. First, they say they come in peace. Then they start taking things, resources, land, lives." He tapped his sketchpad absently. "Mark my words, these guys aren't here to make friends." Before Daniel could respond, a loud hum filled the air, drowning out all other sounds. Everyone froze, looking up as one of the ships descended slowly, hovering just above the tallest buildings. A bright light emerged from its underside, illuminating the ground below. For a moment, it felt like the entire city was holding its breath. Then, a figure appeared. A tall, slender being with smooth, silver skin and elongated limbs. Its eyes glowed faintly, casting an eerie light onto its angular face. It stepped forward gracefully, moving with an unnatural fluidity that made Daniel's skin crawl. Behind it, more figures followed, each identical to the last. A hush fell over the crowd as the lead alien raised a hand, silencing any attempts at speech. Then in perfect English it spoke. "We are the Krillians," it said, its voice deep and resonant. "We have traveled great distances to reach your world. Our purpose is not conquest, but cooperation." Cooperation? Daniel frowned, jotting notes furiously in his notebook. The words sounded promising, but there was something unsettling about the way the creature spoke, calm and measured, yet devoid of emotion. It was like listening to a machine rather than a living being. "My name is Zarnok," the alien continued. "I serve as ambassador for my people. We wish to share our knowledge and technology with yours for mutual benefit. In return, we ask only for your trust and understanding." The crowd erupted into murmurs again, some cheering while others shouted questions. Daniel tried to focus on capturing the scene, but his mind raced with doubts. Trust? Understanding? Those were big asks from creatures who literally dropped out of the sky uninvited. And why choose Chicago? Was it random, or did the Krillians have a specific reason for targeting this city? Later that evening, Daniel sat at his kitchen table, typing up his article for the Prairie Times. Laura, his wife, leaned against the counter, sipping tea and watching him work. She was quieter than usual, her brow furrowed with worry. "What do you think they really want?" she asked finally, breaking the silence. Daniel paused, rubbing his temples. "I don't know, maybe they're telling the truth about wanting to help, or maybe they're lying to buy time." Laura sighed. "Either way, I don't like it. This feels wrong, like we're playing with fire." Daniel nodded absently. He understood her concerns, but part of him couldn't help feeling excited. This was the story of a lifetime, the kind of event that would define generations. Whatever happened next, he wanted to be there to document it. Little did he know, the real drama was only beginning. The days that followed the Krillians' arrival were strange and unsettling. At first, life seemed to go on as usual. People went to work, kids played in the streets, and grocery stores stayed busy. But there was an undercurrent of tension, a sense that the world had shifted in ways no one fully understood yet. The massive alien ships still hung in the skies above major cities, silent but ever present, like watchful sentinels. Daniel Carter spent most of his time chasing leads about the Krillians. He'd written several articles since their arrival, each one trying to piece together more information about their intentions. But the truth was slippery, like trying to catch smoke with bare hands. Every interview he conducted left him with more questions than answers. Some people praised the aliens as saviors, while others saw them as invaders waiting for the right moment to strike. One morning, Daniel decided to visit Ethan Moore again. The farmer lived just outside Chicago, where his fields stretched wide under the open sky. When Daniel arrived, Ethan was standing at the edge of his property, staring at one of the Krillian ships hovering in the distance. His face was grim, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. "They've been poking around here," Ethan said without turning around, "scaring off my livestock. Last night I found tracks in the dirt, big ones, not human." Daniel frowned. "Tracks? What do you mean?" Ethan gestured toward a patch of flattened grass nearby. Sure enough, there were deep impressions in the soil, shaped like elongated ovals. They weren't tire marks or animal prints. They looked almost like footprints, but far too large for any creature native to Earth. "I called the authorities," Ethan continued, his voice bitter. "They told me it's probably nothing, just some teenagers messing around. But I know better." He turned to face Daniel now, his eyes sharp and accusing. "These aliens aren't here to help us. They're up to something and nobody wants to admit it." Daniel snapped a few photos of the tracks before heading back to his car. As much as he wanted to believe Ethan was exaggerating, the evidence was hard to ignore. Something, or someone, had been trespassing on the farmer's land, and it wasn't human. Back in the city, Laura Carter was dealing with her own concerns. She worked as a teacher at a local elementary school, and lately, the kids had been talking nonstop about the aliens. Most of them were excited, drawing pictures of spaceships and friendly extraterrestrials. But a few students seemed genuinely frightened, asking if the Krillians would hurt them or take them away. One afternoon, a boy named Jake Harper came up to her after class. He was small for his age, with messy brown hair and bright blue eyes. "Miss Carter," he said shyly, clutching a crumpled piece of paper in his hand, "do you think the aliens are good or bad?" Laura knelt down so she could look him in the eye. "I don't know, Jake. No one does yet. But we should try to stay hopeful, okay?" Jake nodded, though he didn't look entirely convinced. "Okay," he mumbled, stuffing the paper into his pocket and running off to join his friends. Laura watched him go, feeling a pang of unease. Kids were resilient, but even they could sense when something wasn't right, and lately the air felt heavy with unanswered questions. Meanwhile, the Krillians themselves were becoming more active. Zarnok, their ambassador, held regular meetings with world leaders, discussing plans for cooperation and exchange programs. Scientists from both sides began working together in specially designated facilities, sharing knowledge and developing new technologies. On the surface, everything seemed to be progressing smoothly, but beneath the polished veneer of diplomacy, cracks were starting to show. Dr. Emily Ross was one of the few humans allowed inside the Krillian research centers. A brilliant physicist, she had been handpicked by the government to collaborate with the aliens on energy projects. At first, she was thrilled by the opportunity. The Krillians' technology was years ahead of anything humanity had developed, and the chance to learn from them was exhilarating. But as the weeks went by, Emily grew increasingly uneasy. The Krillians were secretive, often refusing to explain how their devices worked or why certain experiments were necessary. Worse, she noticed that some of her colleagues, human scientists, were being treated differently. They weren't given access to key areas of the facility, and their questions were met with vague answers or outright dismissal. One evening, after a long day of work, Emily sat alone in her office, staring at a stack of encrypted files on her computer screen. She'd managed to sneak copies of some of the Krillians' data during her shifts, hoping to find clues about what they were really doing. So far, all she'd uncovered were fragments, strange symbols, mathematical equations, and references to something called Project Nexus. Whatever it was, it didn't sound harmless. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Startled, she quickly minimized the files and called out, "Come in." It was Dr. Alan Parker, another scientist on the team. He was older than Emily, with graying hair and a perpetually tired expression. "Hey," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "You staying late again?" Emily forced a smile. "Yeah, just catching up on some notes." Parker nodded, though his eyes lingered on her computer screen for a moment too long. "Be careful," he said quietly. "Some things are better left alone." Before Emily could respond, he turned and walked away, leaving her alone with her thoughts. Careful? She didn't need to be told twice. If the Krillians caught her snooping, she had no idea what they might do, but she couldn't stop now, not when the stakes felt so high. Back in the Midwest, tensions between humans and the Krillians were reaching a boiling point. Ethan Moore had become something of a local celebrity, speaking out against the aliens at every opportunity. His warnings resonated with many farmers and rural residents who felt ignored by the government and media. Together, they formed a loose coalition, determined to protect their land and families from what they saw as an existential threat. Daniel attended one of their meetings, held in a barn on the outskirts of town. The air was thick with anger and frustration as people shared stories of strange occurrences, livestock disappearing, crops wilting overnight, and unexplained lights in the sky. Ethan stood at the front of the room, his voice rising above the din. "We can't trust them," he shouted, pointing toward the distant glow of a Krillian ship. "They're lying to us, and we're letting them get away with it." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Daniel scribbled notes furiously, though part of him wondered if Ethan was letting fear cloud his judgment. Still, it was impossible to deny that something unusual was happening. Whether it was the Krillians' fault remained to be seen, but the growing unrest was undeniable. As the meeting broke up, Ethan approached Daniel. "You planning to write about this?" he asked bluntly. Daniel nodded. "Of course, but I need proof, Ethan. Stories and rumors won't cut it." Ethan hesitated, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device. It looked like a cross between a camera and a scanner, its surface covered in blinking lights. "Take this," he said, pressing it into Daniel's hand. "It records everything, sounds, images, even radiation levels. Use it to see what they're really doing out here." Daniel stared at the gadget, unsure whether to feel grateful or suspicious. "Where did you get this?" "Doesn't matter," Ethan replied. "Just promise me you'll use it." Reluctantly, Daniel agreed, He didn't know what he was getting himself into, but one thing was clear. The fragile peace between humans and the Krillians was starting to unravel. And once it did, there was no telling what would happen next. The small town of Maplewood had always been quiet. Its streets were lined with modest homes and its residents lived simple lives, far removed from the chaos of big cities. But even here, the presence of the Krillians loomed large. Their ships could be seen in the distance, hovering over nearby fields like silent predators. For weeks, people had whispered about strange noises at night and unexplained disturbances near the outskirts of town. Most dismissed these stories as paranoia or exaggeration, but not everyone. Jake Harper was a curious boy by nature. At 10 years old, he loved exploring the woods behind his house, imagining himself as an adventurer discovering hidden treasures. His mother, Rachel, often warned him to stay close to home, especially after dark. "It's not safe out there," she'd say, her voice firm but tinged with worry. But Jake rarely listened. To him, the world was full of mysteries waiting to be uncovered. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jake decided to venture farther than usual. He'd heard rumors from other kids about a secret place deep in the woods, a clearing where strange lights sometimes appeared. Armed with nothing but a flashlight and his boundless curiosity, he slipped out of the house while Rachel was busy making dinner. The forest was eerily quiet as Jake made his way deeper into the trees. The only sounds were the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional rustle of branches swaying in the breeze. After walking for what felt like hours, he finally reached the clearing. It was exactly as the other kids had described, wide and open, with tall grass swaying gently in the wind. But something was different tonight. In the center of the clearing stood a structure, a metallic dome that shimmered faintly in the moonlight. Jake's heart raced with excitement. He stepped closer, shining his flashlight on the smooth surface of the dome. There were no doors or windows, just faint lines etched into the metal that seemed to pulse with a soft blue light. As he reached out to touch it, a sharp sound cut through the silence, a high-pitched whine that made his ears ring. Startled, Jake stumbled backward, dropping his flashlight. Before he could react, figures emerged from the shadows surrounding the clearing. They moved quickly, their long limbs gliding across the ground with unnatural speed. Jake froze, his breath catching in his throat. The figures were Krillians, their silver skin gleaming in the dim light. One of them raised a hand, pointing directly at him. "Stay back!" Jake shouted, though his voice trembled. He turned to run, but another Krillian blocked his path. Panic surged through him as he realized there was no escape. The aliens closed in, their glowing eyes fixed on him like predators cornering prey. Back at home, Rachel Harper began to grow uneasy. Dinner was almost ready, but Jake still hadn't returned. She called his name several times, expecting him to come bounding through the door any moment. When he didn't, she grabbed a jacket and headed outside to look for him. The woods were darker now, the moonlight barely piercing through the thick canopy of trees. Rachel called out again, her voice rising in pitch as fear took hold. "Jake, where are you?" Her cries went unanswered. Instead, she heard something else, a faint hum growing louder as she approached the clearing. Her stomach churned with dread as she pushed through the underbrush and saw the metallic dome. Nearby, she spotted Jake's flashlight lying on the ground, its beam flickering weakly. "Jake!" she screamed, scanning the area frantically. But he was gone. News of Jake's disappearance spread quickly through Maplewood. By morning, the entire town was buzzing with speculation. Some blamed wild animals, while others pointed fingers at the Krillians. Daniel Carter arrived in Maplewood shortly after hearing about the incident, determined to uncover the truth. He met Rachel at her home, where she sat on the porch, pale and exhausted, clutching a cup of coffee for warmth. "I know they took him," she said, her voice hollow. "I saw their ship. I saw the dome." Daniel nodded sympathetically, jotting down notes. "Did anyone else see it or hear anything unusual last night?" Rachel shook her head. "No one believes me. They think I'm crazy. But I know what I saw." Determined to help, Daniel visited the clearing later that day. The dome was still there, though it looked less impressive in daylight. He examined the area carefully, looking for clues. The ground was scuffed as if there had been a struggle, and he found traces of what appeared to be synthetic fibers, material unlike anything humans used. As he worked, Ethan Moore showed up unexpectedly. "Heard you were poking around," Ethan said gruffly, holding up the scanner device he'd given Daniel earlier. "Thought you might need this." Daniel accepted the gadget reluctantly, switching it on. The screen lit up immediately, displaying readings that confirmed his suspicions, high levels of radiation and energy signatures consistent with Krillian technology. Whatever the dome was, it wasn't natural. "You're sure about this?" Daniel asked, showing Ethan the results. Ethan nodded grimly. "Told you they weren't here to help, this proves it." Meanwhile, in Chicago, tensions between humans and the Krillians were reaching a breaking point. Protests erupted outside the research facilities, with angry crowds demanding answers about Jake's disappearance. Rachel Harper became the face of the movement, speaking at rallies and pleading for her son's safe return. Her grief was raw and unfiltered, striking a chord with parents across the country. "We trusted them," she told a packed auditorium during one speech. "We let them come into our homes, our towns, our lives. And now my son is missing because of it. How many more children will vanish before we stand up and fight back?" Her words resonated deeply, fueling widespread outrage. Even those who had initially supported the Krillians began to question their intentions. The government struggled to maintain order, caught between public pressure and the aliens' insistence that they were innocent. Zarnok, the Krillian ambassador, addressed the media during a hastily arranged press conference. Standing beneath the harsh glare of spotlights, he remained calm and composed, though his glowing eyes betrayed a hint of irritation. "The allegations against us are baseless," he declared. "We have done nothing to harm your people. If a child has gone missing, it is not our doing." But his words fell flat. Protesters outside chanted loudly, drowning him out. Reporters fired questions at him, their voices sharp with accusation. "Why won't you let us search your facilities?" one demanded. "What are you hiding?" Zarnok hesitated, then replied, "Our operations are classified. Revealing them would compromise both our safety and yours." The crowd erupted in jeers. To most, his refusal only confirmed their worst fears. That night, Daniel sat alone in his hotel room, poring over the data he'd collected from the clearing. The evidence was damning, but without concrete proof, it would be nearly impossible to sway public opinion or hold the Krillians accountable. He picked up his phone and dialed Laura's number, needing to hear her voice. "How's it going?" she asked when she answered. "Not great," Daniel admitted. "I think I know what happened to Jake, but proving it is another story. Everyone's scared, Laura. People are starting to talk about retaliation." Laura sighed. "Be careful, okay? This isn't just about finding the truth anymore. It's about keeping things from spiraling out of control." Daniel promised he'd be cautious, though he wasn't sure how much longer he could keep that promise. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on his shoulders. He knew the stakes were higher than ever, and that the choices humanity made next would shape its future forever. Far away, in a hidden Krillian outpost, Jake Harper sat huddled in a corner, shivering despite the warmth of the chamber. His captors ignored him, moving silently as they worked on machines he couldn't understand. Tears streamed down his face as he clung to the hope that someone, anyone, would come to save him. For now, the world held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The days following Jake Harper's disappearance were tense and chaotic. The protests outside the Krillian facilities grew larger, with thousands of people gathering to demand answers. Signs reading "Bring back Jake" and "No more lies" filled the streets while angry chants echoed through the air. Rachel Harper became the face of the movement, her grief turning into a fiery determination that inspired others to join her cause. Daniel Carter continued his investigation, driven by a mix of guilt and responsibility. He knew he couldn't let this story slip away, not when so much was at stake. Using the scanner Ethan had given him, he spent hours combing through data from the clearing where Jake had vanished. The readings confirmed what he'd suspected. The dome was a Krillian structure, emitting energy signatures unlike anything humans had ever seen. But without direct evidence linking the aliens to Jake's disappearance, it was hard to push back against their denials. One evening, Daniel met with Dr. Emily Ross in a quiet corner of a diner near the city. She looked tired, her eyes shadowed, with dark circles, but there was a fierce intensity about her that hadn't been there before. She slid a folder across the table toward him. "I've been digging," she said quietly, "and I found something you need to see." Inside the folder were documents detailing Project Nexus, the mysterious initiative Emily had uncovered during her time working with the Krillians. According to the files, the project involved experiments on human subjects, though the exact nature of these experiments was heavily redacted. What little information remained suggested they were testing how humans reacted to alien technology and environments. "This is why they're here," Emily whispered, leaning closer. "It's not about helping us. It's about studying us, like lab rats." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. If what Emily was saying was true, then Jake wasn't just missing. He was part of some twisted experiment. The thought made him sick, but it also gave him a new sense of urgency. He needed to expose this, to show the world what the Krillians were really doing. Meanwhile, tensions within humanity itself began to escalate. Not everyone agreed on how to handle the situation. Some believed in peaceful negotiation, urging patience and diplomacy despite the mounting evidence against the Krillians. Others, like Ethan Moore and his group of vigilantes, argued for immediate action. "We can't wait around for them to make the next move," Ethan said during one of their meetings. "Every second we waste gives them more time to hurt someone else." His words struck a chord with many, especially those living in rural areas who felt abandoned by the government. Armed with makeshift weapons and fueled by anger, they began patrolling their lands, determined to protect themselves from any further incursions. Ethan even started training volunteers, teaching them basic self-defense tactics and how to use the few firearms they had managed to gather. Laura Carter watched all of this unfold with growing unease. As a teacher, she saw firsthand how divided people were becoming. Her students talked endlessly about the aliens, their opinions shaped by what they heard at home or online. Some idolized the Krillians, believing they still might be friends. Others feared them, convinced they were monsters waiting to strike. One afternoon, Laura pulled Jake's best friend Tommy aside after class. The boy had been unusually quiet. Since Jake's disappearance, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by sadness and confusion. "How are you holding up?" Laura asked gently. Tommy shrugged, avoiding her gaze. "I don't know. Everyone keeps talking about aliens and stuff, but no one knows where Jake is. I just want him to come back." Laura placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "I know it's hard, Tommy, but your mom and dad are doing everything they can to help find him. So are a lot of other people." Tommy nodded, though he didn't look reassured. As he walked away, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that things were only going to get worse before they got better. Back in Chicago, Zarnok faced increasing pressure from both sides. World leaders demanded transparency, threatening to sever ties if the Krillians refused to cooperate. Protesters continued to rally outside their facilities, their numbers swelling each day. Even among his own kind, doubts were starting to creep in. Some Krillians questioned whether coming to Earth had been a mistake, given the hostility they now faced. Zarnok called an emergency meeting with his advisors, hoping to find a solution. The chamber was dimly lit, its walls lined with glowing panels that cast strange shadows across their faces. His advisors stood silently, their expressions unreadable. "What do you propose we do?" one of them asked finally. "If we reveal our true purpose, it will only provoke more violence. And if we continue as we are, humanity will never trust us," another countered. "Their emotions make them unpredictable. We underestimated," that Zarnok sighed, rubbing his temples. For centuries, the Krillians had prided themselves on being superior to other species, untouchable, invincible. But now, for the first time, he felt a flicker of doubt. Perhaps they had miscalculated. Perhaps humans weren't as weak or insignificant as they had assumed. "We must tread carefully," Zarnok said at last. For now, maintain our position, deny involvement in the child's disappearance, and prepare for the possibility of conflict. His words sent a ripple of unease through the room, but no one dared argue. They all knew what was at stake. Rachel Harper refused to give up. Each day she spoke at rallies, attended press conferences, and met with anyone who might be able to help. Her voice grew stronger with each passing hour, her message resonating with more and more people. She became a symbol of resistance, a mother willing to fight for her child no matter the cost. One night, after a particularly grueling speech, she collapsed onto a hotel bed, exhausted. Her phone buzzed beside her, and she picked it up reluctantly, expecting yet another reporter seeking a comment. Instead, it was Daniel. "I think I'm close to finding something," he said without preamble, "but I need your help." Rachel sat up, suddenly alert. "What do you mean?" "There's a facility, an outpost, that isn't on any official maps. I think it might be connected to Jake's disappearance, if we can get inside." He trailed off, leaving the rest unsaid. Breaking into a Krillian facility would be dangerous, possibly deadly. But Rachel didn't hesitate. "Tell me what you need," she said firmly. "I'll do whatever it takes." The plan came together quickly, born out of desperation and necessity. Daniel reached out to Ethan, who agreed to provide support in the form of his vigilante group. Together, they scouted the location of the hidden facility, using satellite images and the scanner to pinpoint its exact coordinates. Meanwhile, Emily worked tirelessly to decode more of the Project Nexus files, hoping to uncover weaknesses in the Krillians' defenses. On the night of the operation, the team gathered in a secluded barn on the outskirts of town. Rachel stood alongside Daniel, Ethan, and a handful of volunteers, each armed with whatever tools they could scavenge. The mood was somber but resolute. No one spoke much, knowing the risks involved. As they approached the facility under cover of darkness, the air felt heavy with anticipation. The structure loomed ahead, its metallic surface gleaming faintly in the moonlight. Security drones hovered lazily above, their sensors scanning the area for intruders. Ethan signaled for everyone to stay low, guiding them toward a service entrance on the far side of the building. Inside, the corridors were eerily silent, lit only by soft blue lights embedded in the walls. The group moved cautiously, their footsteps muffled by the smooth alien flooring. Every corner they turned seemed to lead deeper into a labyrinth of rooms and passageways, each one stranger than the last. Finally, they reached a large chamber, filled with rows of glass pods. Inside each pod floated a human figure, suspended in a clear liquid. Tubes and wires connected them to machines that hummed softly, monitoring their vital signs. Rachel froze, her breath catching in her throat as she scanned the faces, and then she saw him, Jake, floating lifelessly in one of the pods, his small body pale and still. "Oh my God," she whispered, rushing forward. "Jake!" Before she could reach him, alarms blared throughout the facility. Red lights flashed, bathing the room in an ominous glow. The group scattered, realizing they had been discovered. Guards appeared almost instantly, their weapons trained on the intruders. "Run!" Daniel shouted, grabbing Rachel's arm and pulling her away, but Rachel resisted, her eyes locked on her son. "We can't leave him." Ethan stepped forward, firing a crude weapon at the nearest guard. "Go, we'll hold them off." Reluctantly, Rachel allowed Daniel to drag her toward the exit, tears streaming down her face. Behind them, chaos erupted, as Ethan and his team fought to buy them time. Bullets ricocheted off walls and shouts echoed through the corridors. As they burst out into the night, Rachel collapsed to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. Daniel knelt beside her, unsure of what to say. They had found Jake, but at what cost? And what would happen now? In the distance, the Krillian ship loomed larger than ever, its presence a stark reminder of the power imbalance between humans and their supposed visitors. Whatever peace had existed before was gone, shattered by mistrust and fear. The stage was set for something far bigger, a reckoning neither side could avoid. The escape from the Krillian facility was chaotic and harrowing. Rachel Harper stumbled through the darkness, her mind reeling from what she had seen. Jake, her little boy, trapped in that glass pod like some kind of experiment. It was more than she could bear. Daniel Carter stayed close to her side, guiding her as they ran, his face tight with worry. Behind them, the sounds of gunfire and shouts grew louder. Ethan Moore and his group were still holding off the Krillian guards, but it wouldn't last long. "Keep moving," Daniel urged, glancing over his shoulder. "We're almost there." Rachel didn't respond. Her legs felt heavy, each step an effort, but adrenaline kept her going. She clutched the small device Daniel had given her, a scanner Ethan had provided earlier. It was set to record everything: sights, sounds, even energy readings. If they made it out alive, this evidence could change everything. Finally, they reached the tree line where their truck was hidden. The vehicle was old and battered, but it started on the first try. Daniel climbed into the driver's seat while Rachel collapsed into the passenger side, trembling uncontrollably. As he sped away, the distant hum of Krillian ships filled the air. Lights swept across the forest canopy as the aliens began searching for intruders. "We need to get this footage to someone who can use it," Daniel said, gripping the steering wheel tightly. His voice was calm, but his knuckles were white. Rachel nodded weakly, clutching the scanner to her chest. "They'll pay for what they've done," she whispered, her voice raw with emotion. "Every single one of them." Back at Ethan's farm, the vigilante group regrouped after narrowly escaping the facility. Ethan himself was nursing a wound on his arm, though he refused to acknowledge the pain. His expression was grim as he addressed the others. "They know we're on to them now," he said, pacing back and forth. "But we hit them hard tonight. Maybe not enough to stop them, but enough to make them scared." One of the volunteers, a young man named Kyle, spoke up hesitantly. "What about Jake? Did we save him?" Ethan shook his head. "Not yet, but we found proof. Proof that'll tear their lies apart if we play our cards right." Kyle looked unconvinced. "And then what? Even if people believe us, how do we fight something like that?" "They're stronger, faster, smarter. We adapt," Ethan snapped. "We don't give up. Not when kids are dying because of those monsters." His words silenced the room. Everyone knew the risks, but they also knew they couldn't turn back now. The stakes were too high. Meanwhile, Dr. Emily Ross sat alone in her apartment, staring at the decoded files spread across her desk. The information she had uncovered about Project Nexus was horrifying. The Krillians weren't just studying humans, they were testing how far they could push them before breaking. Some subjects had died during the experiments, their bodies unable to withstand the alien technology. Others had been left permanently damaged, their minds shattered by exposure to unknown forces. Emily rubbed her temples, trying to process what she had read. She had always believed science was meant to improve lives, not destroy them. What the Krillians were doing wasn't exploration or cooperation, it was exploitation. And humanity was paying the price. Her phone buzzed, startling her. It was Daniel. She answered quickly, her heart pounding. "Emily, I need your help," he said without preamble. "We found something big, a hidden facility. We have recordings, data, everything. But we need someone who understands their tech to analyze it." Emily hesitated. Helping them would mean putting herself directly in the crosshairs of both the Krillians and the government. But she couldn't ignore what she knew. Not anymore. "I'm in," she said finally. "Send me everything you've got. Here." Next morning, news of the raid spread quickly. Despite the team's efforts to stay hidden, the Krillians wasted no time retaliating. Drones scoured the countryside, targeting farms and homes suspected of harboring resistance members. In Maplewood, soldiers patrolled the streets, questioning residents and confiscating electronics. Fear gripped the town, turning neighbors against each other as accusations flew. Rachel stood outside her house watching as 2 Krillian guards searched her property. Their glowing eyes scanned every inch of the yard, their movements precise and mechanical. She clenched her fists, forcing herself to stay calm. Inside the house, Daniel hid in the basement, the scanner tucked safely in a metal box designed to block signals. When the guards finally left, Rachel closed the door behind them and leaned against it, letting out a shaky breath. Daniel emerged. From the basement moments later, his face pale. "They're looking for us," he said quietly. "If they find that scanner—" "They won't," Rachel interrupted firmly. "We'll make sure of it." As tensions escalated, world leaders convened an emergency summit to address the growing crisis. Zarnok, the Krillian ambassador, attended reluctantly, flanked by armed escorts. The atmosphere in the meeting room was tense, with human delegates glaring at him from across the table. "You claim innocence," one official said, slamming his fist on the table. "Yet we have reports of unauthorized facilities, illegal experiments, and now attacks on civilians. How do you explain this?" Zarnok remained composed, though his glowing eyes flickered with irritation. "These allegations are baseless. Any actions taken by my people were in self-defense. Humanity has proven itself unpredictable and hostile." "That's rich coming from you," another delegate shot back. "You come here claiming peace, but all along you've been lying to us." The argument continued, voices rising until the room erupted into chaos. Finally, General Samuel Hayes, a stern-faced military leader, stood up and silenced everyone with a single raised hand. "Enough," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "This isn't getting us anywhere. If the Krillians refuse to cooperate, we must prepare for the worst-case scenario." His words sent a chill through the room. For weeks, humanity had debated whether to retaliate against the Krillians. Now, with mounting evidence of their crimes, the question was no longer if, but when. That evening, Rachel met with Daniel and Emily in a secluded cabin deep in the woods. The three of them pored over the data collected during the raid, piecing together a clearer picture of the Krillians' operations. Emily explained how the alien technology worked, pointing out vulnerabilities that could be exploited. "If we target their power cores," she said, tracing a diagram on her laptop screen, "we might be able to disable their ships. Without those, they lose their advantage." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "It's risky, but it could work. We'd need precise coordinates and timing." "And weapons," Rachel added grimly. "Something strong enough to penetrate their defenses." Ethan arrived shortly after, carrying a duffel bag filled with crude explosives and modified firearms. "This is the best we've got," he said, dumping the contents onto the table. "Not pretty, but it gets the job done." Rachel picked up one of the devices, examining it closely. "Will it be enough?" "It'll have to be," Ethan replied. "Because if we don't act now, they'll keep hurting people. Kids like Jake." The weight of his words hung in the air. No one spoke for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Then Rachel straightened, her expression resolute. "Then let's finish what we started," she said. "For Jake. For everyone." Over the next few days, the group finalized their plan. Using the scanner's data, they identified key locations to strike, focusing on the largest Krillian outpost near Chicago. Daniel used his contacts in the media to leak some of the evidence they had gathered, hoping to rally public support. The response was overwhelming. Protesters flooded the streets, demanding justice and calling for action against the invaders. Laura Carter watched the protests unfold on TV, her heart racing. She hadn't heard from Daniel since he disappeared with Rachel, and she feared the worst. Still, she couldn't help feeling proud of him, for standing up, for fighting back, even when the odds seemed impossible. At the same time, Zarnok grew increasingly uneasy. Reports of unrest poured in from across the globe, painting a picture of a planet on the brink of rebellion. His advisors urged him to withdraw, to retreat and reassess their strategy. But Zarnok refused. He had spent centuries believing his people were untouchable, invincible. To admit defeat now, to retreat, was unthinkable. "We will not run," he declared during a private meeting. "Let them come. Let them see what happens when they challenge the Krillians." His confidence was unwavering, but beneath it lay a flicker of doubt, a realization that perhaps for the first time, they had underestimated their opponents. Under the cover of darkness, the resistance group prepared for their final assault. Armed with makeshift weapons and fueled by anger and grief, They moved quietly through the forest toward the Krillian outpost. The massive ship loomed ahead, its surface gleaming ominously under the moonlight. Security drones circled lazily above, their sensors scanning for threats. "This is it," Daniel whispered, checking his weapon one last time. "Once we go in, there's no turning back." Rachel nodded, her jaw set with determination. "Good, because I'm not leaving without my son." Together they stepped forward, ready to confront the enemy head-on. Whatever happened next, they knew one thing for certain: humanity's patience had run out, and vengeance was coming.